Hello and welcome to the first Elim NextGen Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Neville. I am the NextGen Director at Elim Fellowship. I've been doing it for about 4 months at the time of this recording, so I'm pretty new, but having a great time. One thing we wanted to do is start this podcast that would be bringing some interviews of people across Elim, friends of Elim, leaders of Elim, to be able to have the conversation about why the Next Gen ministry is important in the church and how do we do it effectively and working towards the revival we know that God is bringing through the church and to the church. So what I wanted to do this first episode is we had a meetup with some leaders, youth leaders, senior leaders a few weeks ago. And we had some times of interview, but I also had some times of sharing who I was and what the ministry that we're beginning here is, because this is something new. We've had many years, Mark Scorzone really led the youth ministry out of Elim Fellowship in a mighty and powerful way. But coming onto this next season, we wanted to expand that, and we still wanted to continue to reach the youth leaders, to encourage, to equip, and to empower. But then we wanted to spread that even further. We wanted to see the kids leaders have this community too, the family pastors, family leaders, and also some new people to the church, new men and women of God that are called to the ministry to have a connection point with Elim Fellowship. And so the Next Gen position, director's position, was created. And so we're going to talk a little bit about who that is that's directing it, which is me, and where we're going to go for that. And so it's kind of a launching point and a starting point. So this is sort of a part 1, and the next episodes will go into part 2 and then 3 as we talk with President Chris Ball and we talk to Joe Jensen, the director of the United States Ministry, in the next few episodes. So without further ado, we're going to go right into that meetup where I'm talking a little bit about what this mission is and who I am. So enjoy. All right, so let me go into a little bit about who I am. It is a pleasure meeting you guys, because I'm sort of the Elim guy that you've never heard of. And you're like, yeah, because I'm Elim from the core. I grew up in Canada, just outside of Hamilton, Ontario. And when I was young, you know, my mother, we grew up Catholic, but my mother and I were taking a walk on the street, and this lady just witnessed to us. And we got saved right there on the street. And so I was about 3 years old. My mother and I, we accepted Jesus, and we began looking for a church. We went to a few churches, but we found a little church in the middle of Flamborough, Ontario, pastor, a guy named Orchin, and it was an Elim church. It was just a few dozen people, and that was my first introduction to all things Elim. And I didn't realize what was going to happen in my life, because I grew up in the church. We found out, we started to go to camp meeting. So has anybody been to camp meeting, like way back in the 70s and 80s? Anybody tented it? Did you tent it in the field? I was miserable. I hated Elim then. It was. You guys know that field. It would rain. It would get soggy, the big soccer field. And yeah, I would spend weeks there. And I remember one time I was sitting on the front porch. I have a vivid memory of this. I might have been 7 or 8 years old. I said, I am never going to Elim. So a few years later, I went to Elim. And I graduated, and I said, Lord, what am I going to do? I want to go to the mission field. I had a plan. Have you guys ever done that? You say, Lord, I got it all worked out. You could take the weekend off. I was going to go to Elim. Okay. Then I was going to go, maybe I'll get my master's degree afterwards. And I was going to get in an education. Not that I would ever want to be a teacher, because my mother was a teacher, special ed teacher, a lot of people in my family, and I go, that stinks. That's a bad job. I would never want to do that. But I wanted to be a missionary. And so what if I want to go to China? You know, if I get my teaching degree, they'll pay for me to go to China. So that's smart, right? So I'm going to go, I'll get my degree in education, not to teach, just so I could sneak into countries. And it would be great, and then maybe I'll get married along the way because, that would be awesome. I would do youth ministry for a few years, build up a base, get my money. People will throw money at me, 6 months, maybe 8 months. I'll have all the money I need. Off to the mission field. It'll be awesome. Spend the rest of my life doing that. So the plan was going great. First of all, I went home to Canada, to my church in Canada, and I said, I just finished Bible college, ready to be put on the preaching rotation. This will be great. Maybe I'll preach maybe every second week. Don't put me on every week. That would be too much. And my lead pastor looked at me and said, I think I'm going to put you in the middle school. And they locked the door. And I sat there. I remember the day. It's a vivid memory. I was sitting with the middle school saying, these kids are insane. I'm going to go get my master's degree because it's much easier than middle school kids, and I'm never coming back to middle school. So I went to Virginia, went to get my master's in education, again, to get into the countries. That was very good. I met Christy, my wife over there. She was from Louisiana. See, I thought I was going to the hot south. She thought she was going to the frigid north, but it was really just Virginia. So it was halfway. And so I said, I would like to marry you, but I'm going on the mission field. Will you come to the mission field with me? And she said yes. But I was being hired for a Christian dance production. We were going on tour, and I was like, I don't want a long-distance relationship. Hey, do you want to marry me and go? And she said yes. And so I think we met in January. We got married in July. And then we went on tour for a year. And that was 26 years ago. So, yeah. It was 21 of the best years of my life. So, yeah. But then we came back to Regent. People are doing the math and going, wait a minute. We came back to Regent, I was finishing my degree. Christy, she started in theater and then switched to theology, as one does. I was finishing up, and then my friends, the Veenstras, some of you might know Doug and Julia Veenstra, they were helping to start a church, a plant of the Rock Church. And they said, okay, Kevin, we want you as the youth pastor for this church. I said, this is perfectly in my plan. I've got my degrees. I'm going to do the youth for a few years. I was on youth force at Elim. It will be easy. I will go to the mission field and everything's set up. So 6 months we started to get ready for this church. 6 months we prayed through it, we planned on it, and then finally after 6 months we opened the door. I was all ready with my sermon for the youth group. We had 0 teenagers, 40 kids. And so what did my lead pastor ask me? Come on, you kids leaders know. Do you guys mind helping out in the kids for a few weeks? 25 years ago. No, and that's when things really started to change. Once we started, it captured my heart. Now, I continued to do youth because I love them, but I also wanted to do kids ministry because I knew once you see it, and you kids leaders know, you youth leaders know, once you see it, it can never be unseen, right? You can never understand anything different once you've seen it. And I love Pastor Greg, even, I know you've come up through that and family ministry and everything. And even when God calls you to something different, once you've seen it, even when God calls you to something more, you'll never forget it. It will be part of who you are. And so, even you guys that are now as lead pastors, you know that when you're talking about youth, you're talking about it from a different energy. Because you know that these kids are growing up to be, they're not your church next year or 5 years from now. This is the age you start investing in them. And when they come into the nursery, you say, we're already late. We want them to have the relationship with Jesus from here. And so things really started to change when I saw that. And by the way, we tried to go to the mission field, and God said no. I'm literally the only guy at Elim. All those guys that say, Lord, I'll go anywhere, don't send me to Africa? I'm the only guy that said, send me to Africa, and God said, no, you stay here. I'll send that guy over there. He doesn't want to go. But God did do something. He had to do something where he said, well, not only are we going to change your heart, that you're going to send others, you're going to send and lead others, but you're going to be here making sure that they are going. And so that really started to change everything. So fast forward, Christy and I, we saw that a ministry began to come into churches that can't really afford, don't really know how to start a youth and kids ministry. We would come in for a few years, we would build up that ministry, we would train the people, we'd get somebody that was good, we'd put them in charge, and once they're going, we would go on to the next church. So we went up to Toronto and Louisiana, we were in Virginia twice, we went to Florida twice. So really, we were going a lot of places. God bless my kids, they're like military kids. We were talking about that last night at our table. Because it was just every few years we're in a different place. And then finally we got to the place where we said, we're tired, Lord. We want to settle down. I want to work in this church forever. It was in Florida, so it was great. My wife loved it. We were settled down. Finally, Lord, we're here forever. And then I got fired. COVID, So, we were just praying. We're saying, Lord, where are we going to go next? We want to go to a place that we could put down roots. And I got a hold of Jesse. And Jesse, I didn't know Jesse, but we knew the same people. He was an Elim guy. He was working at Bethel. And he was saying, I got a part-time job. And I said, I can't move across the country for a part-time job. But what else do I have to do? So I just went through the process. And you know what? As we began talking, God just started opening the doors. And finally, you know that verse that says, God gives you the desire of your heart, right? What it doesn't tell you is that it's kind of a little bit of a trick. You see, what God does is he puts his desire into your heart. And as he's changing your heart, as you're being transformed by the renewing of your mind, as you're having Jesus' heart, then when you are chomping at the bit to do God's will, he says, fine, I'll give you the desire of your heart. Have you guys experienced that in ministry? So that's what we did. God opened the doors. We connected with Jesse, and we were there. It was what? How long was I there? We were doing part-time. We were loving it. We were finding, and then Jesse came and said, now we want you full-time. And so I was family pastor there. Jesse was moving to FCA. How's the ministry going so far? Yeah, awesome. So you guys, if you don't know Jesse, you got to get to know him. He's an amazing guy. And finally, we said, Lord, we're doing what you want. That's great. And then I came across an advertisement from Elim Fellowship. 20 years ago, when I started ministry, kids ministry, some of you guys know I was in the basement. My lead pastor was amazing. He supported me. He brought me on. He blessed me. But other than him, I was alone in the basement with a bunch of kids, barely getting into church. And I felt alone. And I didn't feel like anybody supported me. They had something for the youth guys, but nothing for the kids pastors in the basement. And I just remember thinking, if only I had a community to be part of. And I remember looking at Elim Fellowship thinking, they were starting the youth program, but they said they need something for the kids too, and for the middle school pastors, because I was alone. 25 years later, I looked online and they were doing that. It was the NextGen Director. And I said, I want to do that. But I've got a great job. I got a great ministry. I'm settled down. I'll give it a shot. So we began the conversation. And it was everything that God had put in my heart over the years to say, not only do we want to find a way to support the youth leaders, we want to find a way to support the youth pastors, the youth workers, the volunteers. And something different. I sat down with Chris and I said, well, why did you call it NextGen? Is it because we're doing the next? And he goes, it's more than just talking about the leaders of kids ministry and youth. It's also talking about this new generation of young men and women that are coming into the ministry. We want to be able to find a way for them to come in. We have a table, and they need a seat at the table. Not only do they need a seat at the table, they need a voice at the table. And sometimes it's hard talking with generations and a voice at the table, but we need somebody to come in that not only helps them sit at the table, but be heard at the table. And so I was like, my heart just said, this is what I want to do. And God, if it's your will, set it up. And that was, how long, Joe? That was about 8 months ago. And so now we're figuring it out. But that's what we're doing here today. You know, on the podcast, I have more, but I don't want to keep you guys very long because I do want to talk with some of these guys about how it started from their point of view and what the heart of Elim Fellowship is. But we kind of go into, on the podcast, we go into some of the core values of why we exist and how we're serving. And I want to say thank you, lead pastors that are here today, especially those who have been in the ministry in various places, because you guys know what it's like to have the people under you that they're looking for what you could give them, what you could support them, and how you could love on them. I was telling the Elim elders, I was sitting next to Eric Peoples. Eric Peoples was my boss 30 years ago in Youth Force. And, you know, I just graduated Elim, and I was teaching this youth group, I think it was the armor of God. It was a lesson that I prepared on the armor of God, and Eric had just come in. He was just observing quickly, and then he was running out. And he said to me in passing, as he was walking, he said, you know what, Kevin, that was really good. You should become a teacher. So I did. I said, sometimes a word from you guys as a lead pastor, especially for us, you know, coming up, is the difference between water and dying of thirst. You know what I'm saying? One thing we found out as youth pastors, you guys will know this, and children's pastors, a number of years ago, is we found out we were siloed in the church. The kids ministry did their thing, youth ministry did their thing, adults did their thing, and we really didn't get along together. Youth pastors and kids pastors, we didn't get along. What's that? There you go, that's right. Youth ministry got everything cool. Kids ministry got the odd chairs, you know, the kind that the sanctuary didn't want anymore because they were ugly, you know. And the kids don't even fit in them, their legs are swinging and they're falling apart. We got all the, hey, we got a new projector for you. It kind of doesn't work, doesn't have red. But you guys don't need that, you're kids, right? Just be loud. So, and then we began to realize that what was happening because we were siloed is that the kids trying to move from one to the next, they weren't making that leap. They were getting lost in the process. And even when they did, it was, these what are they doing in kids ministry? These kids don't know anything. They don't have, you know, and then we would try to send them from youth to the main service, and then we'd really lose them. And they would just disappear. And so we realized we have to find a way to work together. We have to have a vision that works together. And so we began to say we need something that goes from birth all the way through to college and beyond. And so we found a way. And even though we're different people, we did. And you know what? It was the lead pastors that came to us and said, we see what you need. Let's find the way. So family pastors became a thing. But then even then, we're saying, without the lead pastor, it falls apart. You know, not just the vision, but the actual jumping in and doing it together. And then, so what we're seeing now is that when the lead pastor goes, we get not just the kids growing, but us. We get encouragement and endurance and unity. So thank you, lead pastors, for coming, because that says a million things to your leaders that are here, that you believe in them. And then for youth and kids ministers, one of the things that we want to focus this on, and if you listen to the podcast, we go into this, is that a lot of times you will have somebody over the ministry that kind of wants to skip you and go right to the kids, right? We kind of want to skip you and encourage the kids, or do something awesome for the children, and maybe you get some time off, go get a coffee or something. And we began to realize what we're doing is we're missing the heart of the ministry. I had a leader once, a kids leader that I was training up, that he just said, I never want to work with anybody but these kids. This is great. I want to do this. And I told him, one day you're going to have another young leader that you're going to train, and you're going to watch them lead a kid to Christ or lead a teen to Christ. And you're going to realize that was the best thing I've ever seen in my life. As you're investing in other young leaders. So that's what we want to do. We want to look at you guys and say, we don't want to bypass you just to give you tours for your kids and your teens. We want to begin the question of saying, how can we serve you guys? How can we love on you guys? How can we, yes, equip you guys, but we want to see you have endurance, encouragement, and unity. Does that make sense? How do we do that? That's the question. So that's the conversation we are going to start today, but continue on. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be doing this. We're trying to put out a few interviews every month to talk about just across the gambit some issues that would be interesting to me as a NextGen leader, and also to you if you're a youth pastor, if you're a youth leader, kids pastors and leaders, family pastors and leaders, volunteers, those who are new to ministry. We want to be able to touch those issues that are going to affect us all as we grow closer to Christ. So join us for the next episode. We're going to continue this meetup time as we interview President Chris Ball of Elim Fellowship. We'll see you guys then. God bless.